What started as a diplomatic and cordial exchange between President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Donald Trump took an unexpected turn into a session of accusations from Trump and attempts by Ramaphosa to debunk misinformation about South Africa in a civil manner. This is not the first time Trump has turned on a guest, with the world witnessing a heated exchange between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in February, leading to it being abandoned. Today's engagement, however, went the distance but was filled with a palpable tension. Body language expert and Art of People CEO Tania Steyn joins us live for more. Good evening, Tania. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, you specialize in body language and the art of people. Just firstly, share with us just your views on how President Ramaphosa articulated himself, especially at the start of that interaction.
So, yes, it's very interesting. I'm very happy to say that I'm glad it wasn't a Zelenskyy incident. It was less aggressive at all. President Ramaphosa was his body language was quite tight in the beginning. You know, his elbows were touching the sides of his body, which is, to us, it's a sign of anxiety, or let's say nerves. I don't want to say anxiety, it's the wrong word. He was fiddling a lot with his fingers and with the cuffs of his shirt, which is an indication of you want to let go of some nervous energy. So, but look, I'm sure having to be interviewed there and sitting with all those people there is quite nerve-wracking. He did move around a little bit, but other than that, I didn't see any aggressive or confrontational body language from him at all. Not at all.
And then from the host?
No, from Trump was very still in his body language, which is quite odd for me, because normally Trump is very explanatory and he uses his hands, and he was very still today. And you know, when we talk about someone who moves less, the person who moves less is normally perceived to be more in control. Yeah. You know, if you are more calm and collected, you seem to have the control of everything. President Ramaphosa did very well in calming the situation, keeping his palms upright. You know, palms up is a universal sign of openness. He tried to stay open. Once his body language relaxed a little, things became calmer. His tone of voice stayed the same. He was friendly. I do think this interaction between them went rather well, considering the body language. Mm-hmm. You know, if you take what happened to Zelenskyy, there was aggression from the start. I mean, you could literally sense it in their bodies, where this was a little bit of I want to say a better meeting.
But it must have taken a lot out of the president.
Sorry?
Pardon me for interjecting there, but I'm saying many would assume it would have taken quite a lot from President Cyril Ramaphosa, because there was a lot of misinformation that perhaps he would have wanted to clarify, but he remained quite diplomatic in his responses to some of those statements.
And I do think that's to his advantage, the way he managed to stay calm. Mm-hmm. You know, with President Trump, he can fly off the handle at any minute, and he can hear one wrong word and his whole demeanor would change. And I think President Ramaphosa stayed really calm, and his tone of voice stayed calm. He was friendly at all times. I did see a lot of discomfort when the videos was played. He literally looked away from the screen, and we call that distancing behavior. And it's usually we do distancing behavior when something is being said or done that we disagree with or we dislike intensely. So his body language literally tensed up there, and he literally tried to look away from the screen. So he was very uncomfortable there. President Trump insisted on watching. He made a point of showing how he is watching this video, and it felt like President Ramaphosa couldn't wait for this to be over, because the discomfort was so much.
Mm-hmm. Now, that strategy from an interlocutor where they decide to throw in a curveball there, is it to unsettle the other and perhaps get a few concessions or almost win the argument at the end of the day, because you would have been ill-prepared?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's to see what reaction you're going to get. And I think, you know, Donald Trump is trained, his body language is trained very well. He sat very still, his hands, we call this the steepling. And it's a sign of calmness. It keeps you calm. I know in the beginning, in my early days of learning body language, I used Cyril, President Ramaphosa, because he does steepling himself, which means it keeps you calm. It's a sign of intelligence. So Donald Trump really didn't move a lot, which is, he wasn't aggressive. He was sort of calm. He was a little bit confrontational in his body language, but other than that, very calm.
Does it speak to perhaps
President Ramaphosa
President?
had to do a lot more talking, I think, to calm the situation, to keep people
Given that
engaged.
element,
He didn't, you can see how he moves around. It shows discomfort. Donald Trump sits very still. Their feet are engaged. A very interesting thing for me with Trump, Donald Trump has this secret weapon, I want to call it, of how to influence people. And it normally is, where he puts his attention is how he influences you. For me, the good thing here was his attention was pointed towards President Ramaphosa, whereas with Zelenskyy, he didn't even look at him. He hardly talked to him. He talked about him, where this was a totally different interaction. He literally looked at him, made eye contact, and he was engaged. So his attention was with President Ramaphosa, and he wanted to hear. I think their conversations could still carry on. It didn't seem, the body language didn't seem aggressive or distancing to me at all.
I suppose even just President Cyril Ramaphosa's demeanor, or the fact that he went in there with the intention to not allow that kind of an interaction to degenerate into what we saw with President Zelenskyy. I suppose that also unsettled Donald Trump, or defeated him in that respect, because we also saw that genuineness to want to engage President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yes.
President Cyril Ramaphosa was very deliberate, it seemed, in many instances, to go on to speak about how grateful they are for the machines that were sent to South Africa, the 150 during COVID, and all of that. So it almost disarmed President Trump in that sense, because if ever he was somebody that has that fallback of being confrontational, it seemed that President Cyril Ramaphosa was not meeting him there.
You see, and that's the interesting thing about body language. What your body is projecting is what the person who you're speaking to, their brain is picking up. And because he stayed open, he kept his arms open, he never crossed his arms. His palms were facing up. That's the universal sign of openness. Trust me, I want to engage. So he continued to stay open. And I think, like you say, that did disarm, or it helped the conversation a little bit better than the Zelenskyy incident, because there was no confrontation from President Ramaphosa. There was literally I didn't see any confrontational body language from him at all.
Tania, thank you very much for your insights this evening. That's body language expert and Art of People CEO Tania Steyn speaking to us there.